Mark Carney is promising that a re-elected Liberal government will push through new regulations targeting harmful online content. This is under the guise of keeping children safe. But you have to wonder, given that this is their third attempt to regulate internet speech, is this really about the children, or is this about silencing voices that they don't like? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new episode of Jonny Says So, episode 31. And today, we are talking about Mark Carney and his attempt to kill freedom of speech on the internet. Now, this obviously is a continuation of Justin Trudeau's Bill C-63, which, had it have gone through Parliament before it was prorogued after his resignation, it would have severely limited freedom of expression on the internet. Now, Bill C-63 was originally presented with the well-intentioned idea of keeping kids safe on the internet from the very real dangers that lurk online. However, critics of the bill often point out that there were some really nefarious things in there that quite obviously could severely limit speech on the internet and create almost a draconian police state where citizens could be fined and even imprisoned for what they say online. Back in October, Rachel Thomas, MP for Lethbridge, put this out on Twitter. Trudeau's Bill 63 takes censorship to a new level. Imagine getting an ankle monitor for what you might say, not what you've actually said. End the overreach. Fire Trudeau's Liberals.
So I'd like to start with just asking Ms. Van Geyn, do you share the concerns of many Canadians who are worried about Justin Trudeau's censorship agenda and Bill C-11 and C-18?
I would add to that list Bill C-63, which has the potential to be one of the most censorious pieces of legislation that I've seen in a really long time. C-63, the Online Harms Act, would increase penalties for criminalized speech and hate-motivated crimes to life in prison, which part of the concern around that is using these heightened penalties to overcharge criminal defendants and create pressure for plea deals for lower level offenses when there is an argument that the Crown might make that there is a hate element. Even if it's not present, it can be charged, and this overcharging leads to pressure to plead out.
Now, that's a very good point, but I also need to add the big problem with this is who gets to decide what constitutes hate speech.
Another concern we have about C-63 is that it would allow for someone who fears a future hate crime speech, that they can request a judge to put conditions on the would-be speaker, things like an ankle monitor or even imprisonment. And this is for future speech that has not yet taken place.
That is unbelievable. That is literally the movie Minority Report. Like, is this Canada or is this some sci-fi dystopia? Absolutely unreal.
This is incredibly chilling. C-63 would also create a civil mechanism for people to complain about speech to the Human Rights Commission. It's a return of Section 13 of the Canada Human Rights Act, which was rightly repealed for dragging before the Commission journalists and members of the clergy. There is no cost to bringing a complaint, but there's great cost to the complained about. And we have seen human rights tribunals bring before them comedians. That's in a Quebec context. So giving this power to these commissions will chill expression. I did not have time in my 5 minutes to mention C-63, and I understand that there is a separate committee hearing that will address that, but I wanted to put on the record our serious concern about that. With respect to the Online News Act and the Online Streaming Act, While perhaps not censorship in the most classic form, I do share the concerns of millions of Canadians who have lost access to news as a result of the Online News Act. I share the concerns of a lot of academics and Canadian content creators about the regulation of user-generated content on social media platforms like YouTube.
Now, guys, I really wish we could be done talking about Justin Trudeau and his policies. Unfortunately, as we've seen, Mark Carney's Liberals are just a continuation of Justin Trudeau's policies, and worse. Now, the other day at a Mark Carney rally, he was heckled about Epstein Island, and he took the opportunity to oddly segue into the Online Harms Act, which is supposed to be about protecting kids, right? Well, he starts to say the quiet part out loud here. From the Rebel News, Prime Minister Mark Carney uses a heckler's interruption to justify online censorship, blaming the United States for a quote-unquote sea of misogyny, anti-Semitism, hatred, and conspiracy theories, describing it as a pollution that washes over our borders.
We need to do it because one, you know, it's interesting. Earlier today, I'll get back to Trump and trade and everything, because we can't avoid it. But earlier today, we announced a series of measures on crime, and we announced a series of measures with respect to online harm and other factors. And one of the observations we had, one of the issues we're dealing with, there's many serious issues that we're dealing with respect to crimes of violence, conjugal violence, drugs, fentanyl, others. But one of them is with respect to really just the sea of misogyny, anti-Semitism, hatred, conspiracy theories, this sort of pollution that's online that washes over our virtual borders from the United States.
Now, it's very interesting and it's very telling that he lumps in conspiracy theories with actual violence, which he mentioned there. And it's even more interesting what brought this on. Somebody heckled him about his involvement with Epstein Island. Now, he's obviously very rattled by this, and he obviously views this as criminal behavior. He does not like certain narratives being out there, and make no mistake, guys, when he decides to segue into what is essentially talking about what Bill C-63 was, it's quite obvious to me, at least, that that is what this bill is all about. It is about silencing dissenting voices online. Like many of the shows that we all follow on YouTube, they do not like anything counter to their official narrative. Think about it. That's exactly why they are propping up legacy media organizations like the CBC.
And that's a mild version of that. That's fine. I can take the conspiracy theory and all that. But the more...
Can you?
More serious things is when it affects how people behave in our society. When Canadians are threatened going to their community centers or their places of worship or their schools, or God forbid, when it affects our children. So we, my government, if we are elected, will be taking action on those American giants that come across.
Taking action on those American giants. So, make no mistake, guys, he is talking about regulating social media companies. And who knows, if he decides to expand on Bill C-63, we might see the platform X they might actually attempt to ban this platform in Canada. You never know. Now, Mark Carney has recently come out and said that Canada is closer to Europe than the United States. It's no secret that Mark Carney, he's a European citizen. He likes the way they do things over there. In the United Kingdom, right now, the police are throwing people in jail, issuing fines for social media posts. This went viral in the United Kingdom just this past weekend. Look at this, guys. This is absolutely insane. British police warn an elderly, partially deaf man that saying "speak English" is a hate crime. This is absolutely insane.
If you do, that would be really handy for us. But apparently, during some conversations between yourself, apparently you've alleged. We weren't here, so I don't know you said it, but you've alleged to say "speak English" or what's that effect?
Speak clearly.
Speak clearly.
No,
okay.
The gentleman's partially deaf.
Yeah, he can speak clearly.
Yeah.
So I couldn't even hear him.
No, and that's fine, and that's why we've just come to speak, because potentially someone could perceive that as a hate crime.
Did we just know this was going to happen?
No, I know.
People, if someone says to me, "Officer, I believe this," then we need to look at it, because someone's potentially reporting to me as a crime. Because if you do, that would be really handy.
Potentially reporting. Now, this is exactly the kind of language and provisions that are in Bill C-63. This absolutely can't go on, guys. There's no question that freedom of expression is indeed on the ballot in this next election, and I really hope Canadians choose wisely. Pierre Poilievre was recently on the Knowledge Project podcast, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's a great interview, but I want to play you out with this little clip of Pierre Poilievre being the polar opposite of Mark Carney. This is refreshing, and this is the change that we need.
Well, first and foremost, free speech. I would repeal C-11. That's the censorship law, which gives extraordinary powers to the CRTC to control what content is seen, to boost certain types of content that they deem to be Canadian in nature, although there's no real definition of that, and then discourage other content. And I think that will, over time, be a surreptitious way of trying to manage the debate in favor of what the government wants people to see. I would repeal that entirely. We need to look at the internet and the rise of social media differently than this government. They think that having too many voices is a threat. I think it's an opportunity. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do this. You wouldn't have been able to do this 30 years ago, unless you wanted to invest tens of millions of dollars in a production studio and a distribution plan, and you'd have to sign deals with a broadcaster to get yourself on air. But the fact that you have this voice is the result of social media and the internet. The existing media is not threatened by rising costs or a diminishing number of people interested in reading news. Their challenge is there's massive increase in competition. There's actually more media today than there ever has been. It's just that it's not the traditional media that we think of. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we should open the door.
Do you think your position on media allows you to be covered accurately? When one candidate is saying we shouldn't be offering as many subsidies to media, and one candidate is offering more subsidies to media, how do we, I don't understand this.
I think it's a problem. I think it makes it very difficult for media to make a judgment without keeping in the back of their head which politician is going to pay the biggest subsidy. And I think that's worrisome. The media should be objectively reporting on the stories. But if, a politician is coming along and saying, well, I'm going to give more money to this or that outlet than my opponent will, then obviously that could create the perception of bias in the resulting reporting. And I don't think government should control the media. I think the idea of a free press is that it's independent from the government.
What role, if any, should the government play in the process of regulating speech?
The criminal code already bans incitements to violence and incitement to genocide, other utterances that are designed to instruct a violent or hostile attack against a particular group of people. That is in the criminal code already, and that has not harmed free speech. What I worry about, you're talking about people marching down streets and shouting death to this or that group. A lot of that is not the result of free speech, but it's about a very toxic ideology that has been pushed from the top down. You look at the way the Jewish community has been targeted. Well, governments have pushed ideologies through universities and schools and even government departments that have given grants to extreme racists, anti-Semites. And so the ideology is not coming from, Joe and Jane public going online and just blurting out obscenities about a particular group. It's coming from a really toxic, radical ideology that has proliferated in halls of power over the last roughly decade. We had one guy, Latham Ruth, who said things about Jews that I can't even repeat. The guy got a grant for an anti-racism program. The University of Ottawa had hired a guy as a professor who had committed a terrorist attack in Paris before he came to Canada. Some of the schools are pushing kids to go into these awful anti-Israel, anti-Jewish protests. I see that as a top-down phenomenon, not a bottom-up one. So I don't think that we should use that as an excuse to take away legitimate political discourse in the internet.
So there it is, guys. On one side, you have Pierre Poilievre, who has reaffirmed his belief in freedom of expression, and he is promising not to regulate the internet and to repeal the existing censorship legislation that's already in place. And on the other hand, you have Mark Carney, who is promising more regulation and more criminalization of your freedom of expression. I hope Canadians make the right choice in just a couple of short weeks. And that's my show for tonight, guys. Now I'd love to turn it over to you guys in the comments. What do you make of all this? Are you concerned about what a re-elected Liberal government will do for freedom of speech in Canada? And now would be the perfect time to remind you guys that we need independent media and smaller voices to override the legacy media now more than ever. So if you like what you see, drop me a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll always know what I'm up to in the future. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.